Hey guys, how's it going? TJ here with Dead History, and I'm here today with Henry.
Hi.
And today is our next presidential series installment. Henry, who are we taking a look at?
Ronald Reagan.
What number president is he?
The 40th president of the United States.
That's right, the 40th president of the United States, Ronald Reagan. But before we get into the 40th president of the United States, Ronald Reagan, first, Henry, tell the people what they got to do.
Hit subscribe down below, leave all your comments and questions, give us a thumbs up, and leave a like.
Very good. Great job. Hit subscribe down below. Leave those comments and questions. We love them. Give us a like and a thumbs up. And then what else they got to do?
Bell.
Hit that little notification bell, right? Hit that notification bell so you can be notified when we do release a new video. And Henry, when is it?
Every week.
Every single week. That's right. So now sit back and relax because we're going to take a look in this next presidential series installment at the man behind us, the 40th president of the United States, Ronald Reagan. And this is
Dead History.
Dead History. Hey guys, TJ back with you, and of course here with Henry.
Hi.
And the man behind us, the 40th president of the United States, who, Henry?
Ronald Reagan.
That's right, Ronald Reagan. And we got some cool things to tell you about Ronald Reagan, such as he's actually the first president ever in my lifetime, right, Henry? Mm-hmm. I just told you that.
Yep.
Plus, Ronald Reagan was actually an actor. Yeah, he was in movies.
Movies?
Yeah, he was actually on the big screen. And one of the big regrets that he had, and one of the things that made him upset, was that he never won an Oscar for any of his acting roles. And we're going to get into all that. Another really cool thing about Ronald Reagan, he actually was president when the Berlin Wall came down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool stuff. And, of course, another little fun fact about Ronald Reagan, his favorite snack and things that he used to get a lot of for free, people would send them to him all the time, was
Jelly beans.
jelly beans. He loved eating jelly beans. We're going to get into all these fun facts about Ronald Reagan. So you did the likes, right? They did the subscribes. Hopefully leaving those comments and questions, right? Now, Henry, tell the people, what do they got to go get?
Get the potato chips and the soda and the popcorn and pretzels, and if you're Ronald Reagan, you get the jelly beans.
That's right, good job. If you like Ronald Reagan, go get the jelly beans or the potato chips or the soda, whatever you want to sit back and relax, because we got a lot to tell you about the 40th president of the United States, the man behind us, Ronald Reagan, in this next presidential series installment. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hey guys, welcome. TJ here with Dead History, and welcome to our next presidential series installment, taking a look at the 40th president of the United States, Ronald Reagan. I am flying solo today for the audio, of course. Henry doesn't usually, usually like to do these audios, so I am solo. Now, I don't even need to say it. We know what part one's going to be: childhood, birthplace, education, rise in the political ranks. That's pretty much what it's going to be for part one. And then part two, we'll take a look at the presidency and such of Ronald Reagan. This is it, guys. This is we have Ronald Reagan this week, and then next week is George H.W. Bush, and we are done with the presidential series. I'm not going to go over everything that's coming after that. We all should know by now. Errors and omissions, questions and answers, live stream, etc., etc. So be prepared. So there will be a few weeks of some other things before the vice president series starts. And then we will get into vice presidents, of course. Please, one thing I do want to say, though, keep those questions coming, because I will be doing like a separate question and answer video. So please submit your questions to me in the comments below. Anything you want to ask. It could be president related, vice president related, gravesite related. It could be related to Declaration of Independence signers' gravesites, or U.S. Constitution signers' gravesites, or anywhere. Anything you want to ask. It'll be a fun question and answer session. So, Definitely submit those questions below, please. Okay, so one last thing, and then I'll jump right in. Ronald Reagan is the second president where I have not visited his gravesite. There is only two I have not visited, and that is Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, both in California. So Reagan, out there in California, I have not been to his gravesite yet, or to his presidential library, or anything like that yet. Geez, pardon me, my voice is cracking. So just keep that in mind. Of course, I'm going to show you the gravesite. I'm going to use stock photos and such. A lot of people I know have been out there, so it's not going to be a problem for me to, show you a lot of photos of the gravesite. But I have never been there personally, so I will try to make up for it as best I can with some bonus footage. Now, I do have bonus footage. I may not have as much as I usually do, but I do have some. There's no doubt. So, keep that in mind. All right, let's just jump right in here. Here we go. Part one of this next presidential series installment, looking at Ronald Reagan. Here we go. Ronald Wilson Reagan was born on February 6th of 1911 in an apartment on the second floor of a commercial building in Tampico, Illinois. He was the younger son of Nell, Clyde, and Jack Reagan. Jack was a salesman and storyteller whose grandparents were Irish Catholic immigrants from County Tipperary, while Nell was of English and Scottish descent. Ronald Reagan's older brother, Neil Reagan, became an advertising executive. Ronald Reagan's father nicknamed his son Dutch due to his fat little Dutchman appearance and Dutch boy haircut. The nickname stuck with him throughout his youth. Reagan's family briefly lived in several towns and cities in Illinois, including Monmouth, Galesburg, and Chicago. In 1919, they returned to Tampico and lived above the H.C. Pitney Variety Store until finally settling in Dixon, Illinois. After his election as president, Ronald Reagan lived in the upstairs White House private quarters, and he would quip that he was living above the store again. Ronald Reagan wrote that his mother always expected to find the best in people and often did. She attended the Disciples of Christ Church regularly and was active and very influential within it. She frequently led Sunday school services and gave the Bible readings to the congregation during the services. A firm believer in the power of prayer, she led prayer meetings at church and was in charge of midweek prayers when the pastor was out of town. She was also an adherent of the social gospel movement. Her strong commitment to the church is what induced her son Ronald to become a Protestant Christian rather than a Roman Catholic like his Irish father. He also stated that she strongly influenced his own beliefs. I know that she planted that faith very deeply in me. Reagan identified himself as a born-again Christian. In Dixon, Ronald Reagan was strongly influenced by his pastor, Bay Hill Cleaver, and he was a scholar, basically. Cleaver was the father of Reagan's fiancée. Reagan saw him as a second father. Stephen Vaughn says, at many points, the positions taken by the First Christian Church of Reagan's youth coincided with the words, if not the beliefs, of the latter-day Reagan. These positions included faith in providence, association of America's mission with God's will, belief in progress, trust in the work ethic, and admiration for those who achieved wealth, and uncomfortableness with literature and art that questioned the family or challenged notions of proper sexual behavior, presumption that poverty is an individual problem best left to charity rather than the state, sensitivity to problems involving alcohol and drugs, and the use of government to protect civil rights for minorities. According to Paul Kenger, Ronald Reagan had a particularly strong faith in the goodness of people. This faith stemmed from the optimistic faith of his mother and the Disciples of Christ faith, into which he was baptized in 1922. For that period, which was long before the Civil Rights Movement, Reagan's opposition to racial discrimination was unusual. He recalled the time when his college football team was staying at a local hotel which would not allow 2 black teammates to stay there, and he invited them to his parents' home 15 miles away in Dixon. His mother invited them to stay overnight and have breakfast the next morning. His father was strongly opposed to the Ku Klux Klan due to his Catholic heritage, but also due to the Klan's anti-Semitism and anti-black racism. After becoming a prominent actor, Ronald Reagan gave speeches in favor of racial equality following World War II. During his years at Hollywood, Ronald Reagan became a member of the Hollywood Beverly Christian Church and attended its services infrequently. Subsequently, from 1964 onwards, Ronald Reagan began to attend church services at Bel Air Presbyterian Church, where he became acquainted with Don Mumwa. Reagan scaled down his church attendance while serving as president, citing the inconvenience that his large Secret Service entourage would bring to other churchgoers and the potential danger to others from his presence due to possible terrorism. After leaving office, Ronald Reagan officially joined Bel Air as its member and regularly attended services there. Ronald Reagan attended Dixon High School, where he developed interest in acting, sports, and storytelling. His first job involved working as a lifeguard at the Rock River in Lowell Park in 1927. Over 6 years, Ronald Reagan performed 77 rescues. He attended Eureka College. He was an indifferent student, majored in economics and sociology, and graduated with a C average. He developed a reputation as a jack of all trades, excelling in campus politics, sports, and theater. He was a member of the football team and captain of the swim team. He was elected student body president and participated in student protests against the college president. After graduating from Eureka in 1932, Ronald Reagan took jobs in Iowa as a radio announcer at several stations. He moved to WHO Radio in Des Moines as an announcer for Chicago Cubs baseball games. His specialty was creating play-by-play accounts of games using only basic descriptions that the station received by wire as the games were in progress. While traveling with the Cubs in California in 1937, Ronald Reagan took a screen test that led to a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers Studios. He spent the first few years of his Hollywood career in the B-film unit, where Reagan joked the producers didn't want them good, they wanted them Thursday. He earned his first screen credit with a starring role in the 1937 movie Love is on the Air, and by the end of 1939, he had already appeared in 19 films, including Dark Victory with Bette Davis and Humphrey Bogart. Before the film Santa Fe Trail with Errol Flynn in 1940, he played the role of George Gipp in the film Newt Rockney, All-American. From it, he acquired the lifelong nickname The Gipper. In 1941, exhibitors voted him the 5th most popular star from the younger generation in Hollywood. Ronald Reagan played his favorite acting role in 1942's King's Row, where he plays a double amputee who recites the line, "Where's the rest of me?" later used as the title of his 1965 autobiography. Many film critics considered King's Row to be his best movie, though the film was condemned by the New York Times critic Bosley Crowther. King's Row made Reagan a star. Warner immediately tripled his salary to $3,000 a week. Shortly afterwards, he received co-star above the title billing with Flynn who was still a huge star at the time in Desperate Journey. In April of 1942, Ronald Reagan was ordered to military active duty in San Francisco and never quite became a big first-rank film star despite playing the lead in numerous movies. After his wartime military service, he co-starred in such films as The Voice of the Turtle, John Loves Mary, The Hasty Heart, Bedtime for Bonzo, Cattle Queen of Montana, Tennessee's Partner, Hellcats of the Navy, which was the only film in which he appears with Nancy Reagan, and his one turn at playing a vicious villain in the 1964 remake, The Killers, which was his final film with Lee Marvin and Angie Dickinson. Throughout his film career, Ronald Reagan's mother answered much of his fan mail. After completing 14 home study Army extension courses, Ronald Reagan enlisted in the Army Enlisted Reserve and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Officers Reserve Corps of the Cavalry on May 25th of 1937. On April 18th of 1942, Ronald Reagan was ordered to active duty for the first time. Due to his poor eyesight, he was classified for limited service only, which excluded him from serving overseas. His first assignment was at the San Francisco Port of Embarkation at Fort Mason, California, as a liaison officer of the Port and Transportation Office. Upon the approval of the U.S. Army Air Forces, he applied for a transfer from the Cavalry to the AAF on May 15th of 1942 and was assigned to the AAF Public Relations and subsequently to the 18th AAF Base Unit at Culver City, California. On January 14th of 1943, he was promoted to First Lieutenant and was sent to the Provisional Task Force Show Unit of This Is the Army at Burbank, California. He returned to the 18th AAF Base Unit after completing this duty and was promoted to Captain on July 22nd of 1943. In January of 1944, Ronald Reagan was ordered to temporary duty in New York City to participate in the opening of the 6th War Loan Drive, which campaigned for the purchase of war bonds. He was reassigned to the 18th AAF Base Unit on November 14th of 1944, where he remained until the end of World War II. By the end of the war, his units had produced some 400 training films for the Air Force, including cockpit simulations for B-29 crews scheduled to bomb Japan. He was separated from active duty on December 9th of 1945 as an Army captain. While he was in the service, Ronald Reagan obtained a film reel depicting the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camps. He held on to it, believing that doubts would someday arise as to whether the Holocaust had occurred. Ronald Reagan was first elected to the board of directors of the Screen Actors Guild in 1941, serving as an alternate member. After World War II, he resumed service and became third vice president in 1946. When the Screen Actors Guild president and 6 board members resigned in March of 1947 due to the union's new bylaws on conflict of interest, Ronald Reagan was elected president in a special election. He was subsequently re-elected 6 times in 1947, 1948, 1949, 1950, 1951, and 1959. He led the Screen Actors Guild through implementing the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act, various labor management disputes, and the Hollywood blacklist era. First instituted in 1947 by studio executives who agreed that they would not employ anyone believed to be or to have been communists or sympathetic with radical politics. The blacklist grew steadily larger during the early 1950s as the U.S. Congress continued to investigate domestic political subversion. Also during his tenure, Ronald Reagan was instrumental in securing residuals for television actors when their episodes were rerun, and later for motion picture actors when their studio films aired on TV. Pretty cool. I actually didn't realize that he was president of the Screen Actors Guild. Interesting fact that I just learned when I was researching Reagan. So pretty cool. Now we're going to move on to him being an FBI informant, and then the Hollywood hearings and some more interesting stuff. So here we go. In 1946, Ronald Reagan served on the National Board of Directors for the Independent Citizens Committee of the Arts, Sciences, and Professions, and had been a member of its Hollywood chapter. His attendance at a July 10, 1946 meeting brought him to the attention of the FBI, which interviewed him on April 10th of 1947 in connection with its investigations into the Hollywood chapter of that group, the Independent Citizens Committee of the Arts, Sciences, and Professions. 4 decades later, it was revealed that during the late 1940s, Ronald Reagan, under the codename T-10, and his then-wife Jane Wyman, provided the FBI with the names of actors within the motion picture industry whom they believed to be communist sympathizers. Even so, he was uncomfortable with the way the Screen Actors Guild was being used by the government, asking during one FBI interview, do they expect us to constitute ourselves as a little FBI of our own and determine just who is a commie and who isn't? In October of 1947, during HUAC's Hollywood hearings, Reagan testified as president of the Screen Actors Guild. There has been a small group within the Screen Actors Guild which has consistently opposed the policy of the Guild Board and officers of the Guild, suspected of more or less following the tactics that we associate with the Communist Party. At times, they have attempted to be a disruptive influence. I have heard different discussions, and some of them tagged as communists. I find myself misled into being a sponsor on another occasion for a function that was held under the auspices of the Joint Anti-Fascist Refugee Committee. Regarding a jurisdictional strike going on for 7 months at that time, Ronald Reagan testified that the first time that this word communist was ever injected into any of the meetings concerning the strike was at a meeting in Chicago with Mr. William Hutchinson, president of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners, who were on strike at that time. He asked the Screen Actors Guild to submit terms to Mr. Walsh for Walsh to give in the settling of this strike, and he told us to tell Mr. Walsh that if he would give in on these terms, he in turn would run this Sorrell and the other commies out. I am quoting him, and break it up. However, Ronald Reagan also opposed measures soon to manifest in the Nixon bill in May of 1948 by saying, as a citizen, I would hesitate or not like to see any political party outlawed on the basis of its political ideology. I abhor their philosophy, but I detest more than their tactics, which are those of the fifth column and are dishonest. But at the same time, I never as a citizen want to see our country become urged by either fear or resentment of this group, that we ever compromise with any of our democratic principles through that fear or resentment. Further, when asked whether he was aware of communist efforts within the Screen Writers Guild, Reagan would not play along, saying, "Sir, like the other gentleman, I must say that is hearsay." Reagan landed fewer film roles in the late 1950s and moved into television. He was hired as the host of General Electric Theater, a series of weekly dramas that became very popular. His contract required him to tour General Electric plants 16 weeks out of the year, which often demanded that he give 14 talks per day. He earned approximately $125,000, which is the equivalent to about $1.1 million in this role. The show ran for 10 seasons from 1953 to 1962, which increased Reagan's national profile. On January 1st of 1959, Ronald Reagan was the host and announcer for ABC's coverage of the Tournament of Roses parade. In his final work as a professional actor, Ronald Reagan was a host and performer from 1964 to 1965 on the television series Death Valley Days. Following their marriage in 1952, Ronald and Nancy Reagan, who continued to use the stage name Nancy Davis, acted together in 3 TV series episodes, including a 1958 installment of General Electric Theater titled A Turkey for the President. Pretty interesting stuff there. Now, on to a little bit about his marriages. In 1938, Ronald Reagan co-starred in the film Brother Rat with actress Jane Wyman. They announced their engagement at the Chicago Theater, and they married on January 26th of 1940 at the Weekirk O, the Heather Church in Glendale, California. Together, they had 2 biological daughters, Maureen and Christine. Christine died prematurely. She was born prematurely and died on June 26th of 1947. The couple, they also adopted a son, Michael. After the couple had arguments about Reagan's political ambitions, Wyman filed for divorce in 1948, citing a distraction due to her husband's Screen Actors Guild union duties. The divorce was finalized in 1949. Wyman, who was a registered Republican, also stated that their breakup stemmed from a difference in politics. Reagan was still a Democrat at the time. When Ronald Reagan became president 32 years later, he became the first divorced person to assume the nation's highest office. Ronald Reagan and Wyman continued to be friends until his death. Wyman voted for Reagan in both his runs, and on his death, she said, "America has lost a great president and a great, kind, and gentle man." Ronald Reagan met actress Nancy Davis in 1949 after she contacted him in his capacity as president of the Screen Actors Guild. He helped her with issues regarding her name appearing on a communist blacklist in Hollywood. She had been mistaken for another Nancy Davis. She described their meeting by saying, "I don't know if it was exactly love at first sight, but it was pretty close." They were engaged at Chasen's Restaurant in Los Angeles and were married on March 4th of 1952 at the Little Brown Church in the Valley, North Hollywood, now Studio City, in the San Fernando Valley. Actor William Holden served as best man at the ceremony. They had 2 children together, Patty and Ronald, also known as Ron. The couple's relationship was close, authentic, and intimate. During his presidency, they often displayed affection for each other. One press secretary said, "They never took each other for granted. They never stopped courting. He often called her Mommy, and she called him Ronnie. He once wrote to her, 'Whatever I treasure and enjoy, all would be without meaning if I didn't have you.'" In 1998, while Ronald Reagan was stricken by Alzheimer's, Nancy Reagan told Vanity Fair, "Our relationship is very special. We were very much in love and still are. When I say my life began with Ronnie, well, it's true. It did. I can't imagine life without him." Nancy Reagan died on March 6th of 2016 at the age of 94. So now a little bit about his political career, or his early political career, I should say. Here we go with that. Ronald Reagan began as a Hollywood Democrat, and Franklin D. Roosevelt was a true hero to him. He moved to the right wing in the 1950s, became a Republican in 1962, and emerged as a leading conservative spokesman in the Goldwater campaign of 1964. In his early political career, he joined numerous political committees with a left-wing orientation. such as the American Veterans Committee. He fought against Republican-sponsored right-to-work legislation and supported Helen Gahagan Douglas, Helen Gahagan Douglas, in 1950 when she was defeated for the Senate by Richard Nixon. We just learned about that in our Nixon series a couple weeks back. That's how Nixon got the nickname Tricky Dick during that campaign against Helen Douglas. It was his belief, this is Reagan now, it was his belief that communists were a powerful backstage influence in those groups that led him to rally his friends against them. At rallies, Reagan frequently spoke with a strong ideological dimension. In December of 1945, he was stopped from leading an anti-nuclear rally in Hollywood by pressure from the Warner Brothers studio. He would later make nuclear weapons a key point of his presidency when he specifically stated his opposition to mutual assured destruction. Ronald Reagan also built on previous efforts to limit the spread of nuclear weapons. In the 1948 presidential election, Reagan strongly supported Harry S. Truman and appeared on stage with him during a campaign speech in Los Angeles. In the early 1950s, his relationship with actress Nancy Davis grew, and he shifted to the right when he endorsed the presidential candidacies of Dwight D. Eisenhower and Richard Nixon. Reagan was hired by General Electric in 1954 to host the General Electric Theater, a weekly TV drama series. He also traveled across the country to give motivational speeches to over 200,000 General Electric employees. His many speeches, which he wrote himself, were nonpartisan but carried a conservative, pro-business message. He was influenced by Lemuel Boulware, a senior GE executive. Boulware, known for his tough stance against unions and his innovative strategies to win over workers, championed the core tenets of modern American conservatism. Free markets, anti-communism, lower taxes, and limited government. Eager for a larger stage, but not allowed to enter politics by GE, Reagan quit and formally registered as a Republican. He often said, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party, the party left me." When the legislation that would become Medicare was introduced in 1961, he created a recording for the American Medical Association warning that such legislation would mean the end of freedom in America. Reagan said that if his listeners did not write letters to prevent it, we will awake to find that we have socialism. And if you don't do this, and if I don't do it, one of these days, you and I are going to spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free. Other Democratic initiatives he opposed in the 1960s included the food stamp program, raising the minimum wage, and the establishment of the Peace Corps. He also joined the National Rifle Association and would become a lifetime member. Reagan gained national attention in his speeches for conservative presidential contender Barry Goldwater in 1964. Speaking for Goldwater, Reagan stressed his belief in the importance of smaller government. He consolidated themes that he had developed in his talks for GE to deliver his famous speech, A Time for Choosing. The Founding Fathers knew a government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they knew when a government set out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. So we have come to a time for choosing. You and I are told we must choose between a left or right. But I suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There is only an up or down. Up to man's age-old dream, the maximum of individual freedom consistent with order, or down to the ant-heap of totalitarianism. So that was on October 27th of 1964 when he made the Time for Choosing speech. Now, unfortunately, that speech was not enough to turn around the faltering Barry Goldwater campaign, but it was the crucial event that established Reagan's national political visibility. David Broder of the Washington Post called it the most successful national political debut since William Jennings Bryan electrified the 1896 Democratic Convention with his Cross of Gold speech. So there you go. Pretty cool. California Republicans were impressed with Reagan's political views and charisma after his time for choosing speech. And in late 1965, he announced his campaign for governor in the 1966 election. He defeated former San Francisco Mayor George Christopher in the Republican primary. In Ronald Reagan's campaign, he emphasized two main themes: to send the welfare bums back to work, and in reference to burgeoning anti-war and anti-establishment student protests at the University of California, Berkeley, to clean up the mess at Berkeley. In 1966, Ronald Reagan accomplished what both U.S. Senator William Nolan in 1958 and former Vice President Richard Nixon in 1962 failed to do. He was elected, defeating Pat Brown, the Democratic two-term government. Ronald Reagan was sworn in on January 2nd of 1967. In his first term, he froze government hiring and approved tax hikes to balance the budget. Shortly after assuming office, Ronald Reagan tested the 1968 presidential waters as part of a Stop Nixon movement, hoping to cut into Nixon's Southern support and become a compromise candidate. If neither Nixon nor second-place candidate Nelson Rockefeller received enough delegates to win on the first ballot at the Republican convention. However, by the time of the convention, Nixon had 692 delegate votes, 25 more than he needed to secure the nomination, followed by Rockefeller with Reagan in third place. Ronald Reagan was involved in several high-profile conflicts with the protest movements of the era, including his public criticism of university administrators for tolerating student demonstrations at the Berkeley campus. On May 15th of 1969, during the People's Park protests at the university's campus, Reagan sent the California Highway Patrol and other officers to quell the protests. This led to an incident that became known as Bloody Thursday, resulting in the death of student James Rector and the blinding of carpenter Alan Blanchard. In addition, 111 police officers were injured in the conflict, including one who was knifed in the chest. Ronald Reagan then called out 2,200 state National Guard troops to occupy the city of Berkeley for 2 weeks to crack down on the protesters. The Guard remained in Berkeley for 17 days, camping in People's Park, and demonstrations subsided as the university removed cordoned-off fencing and placed all development plans for People's Park on hold. 1 year after the incident, Ronald Reagan responded to questions about campus protest movements, saying, "If it takes a bloodbath, let's get it over with. No more appeasement." When the Symbionese Liberation Army kidnapped Patty Hearst in Berkeley and demanded the distribution of food to the poor, Ronald Reagan joked to a group of political aides about an outbreak contaminating the food. In early of 1967, the national debate on abortion was starting to gain traction. Sorry about that, guys. Had to clear my throat. So in the early stages of the abortion debate, Democratic California State Senator Anthony Bellinson introduced the Therapeutic Abortion Act in an effort to reduce the number of backroom abortions performed in California. The state legislator sent the bill to Reagan's desk where, after many days of indecision, he reluctantly signed it on June 14th of 1967. About 2 million abortions would be performed as a result, mostly because of a provision in the bill allowing abortions for the well-being of the mother. Reagan had been in office for only 4 months when he signed the bill and later stated that had he been more experienced as governor, he would not have signed it. After he recognized what he called the consequences of the bill, he announced that he was anti-abortion. He maintained that position later in his political career, writing extensively about abortion. In 1967, Ronald Reagan signed the Milford Act, which repealed a law allowing the public carrying of loaded firearms. The bill, which was named after Republican Assemblyman Don Milford, garnered national attention after the Black Panthers marched bearing arms upon the California state capitol to protest it. Despite an unsuccessful attempt to force a recall election on Reagan in 1968, he was re-elected governor in 1970, defeating Jesse M. Unruh. He chose not to seek a third term in the following election cycle. One of Reagan's greatest frustrations in office was the controversy of capital punishment, which he strongly supported. His efforts to enforce the state laws in this area were thwarted when the Supreme Court of California issued the People v. Anderson decision, which invalidated all death sentences issued in California before 1972, though the decision was later overturned by a constitutional amendment. The only execution during Reagan's governorship was on April 12th of 1967, when Aaron Mitchell's sentence was carried out by the state in San Quentin's gas chamber. In 1969, Ronald Reagan signed the Family Law Act, which was basically two bills that had been written and revised by the California state legislature over more than 2 years. It became the first no-fault divorce legislation in the United States. Years later, he told his son Michael that signing that law was his greatest regret in public life. Reagan's terms as governor helped to shape the policies he would pursue in his later political career as president. By campaigning on a platform of sending the welfare bums back to work, he spoke out against the idea of the welfare state. He also strongly advocated the Republican ideal of less government regulation of the economy, including that of undue federal taxation. Ronald Reagan's 1976 campaign relied on a strategy crafted by campaign manager John Sears of winning a few primaries early to damage the inevitability of Gerald Ford's likely nomination. This is the 1976 presidential campaign, by the way. Ronald Reagan won North Carolina, Texas, and California, but the strategy failed as he ended up losing New Hampshire, Florida, and his native Illinois. The Texas campaign lent renewed hope to Reagan when he swept all 96 delegates chosen in the May 1st primary, with 4 more awaiting at the state convention. Much of the credit for that victory came from the work of 3 co-chairmen, including Ernest Angelo, the mayor of Midland, and Ray Barnhart of Houston, whom Reagan, as president, would appoint in 1981 as director of the Federal Highway Administration. However, as the GOP convention neared, Gerald Ford appeared close to victory. Acknowledging his party's moderate wing, Reagan chose moderate Senator Richard Schweiker of Pennsylvania as his running mate if nominated. Nonetheless, Gerald Ford prevailed with 1,187 delegates to Reagan's 1,070. Ronald Reagan's concession speech emphasized the dangers of nuclear war and the threat posed by the Soviet Union. Though he lost the nomination, he received 307 write-in votes in New Hampshire, 388 votes as an independent on Wyoming's ballot, and a single electoral vote from a faithless elector in the November election from the state of Washington. So there's that. Now his opposition to the Briggs Initiative. In 1978, conservative state legislator John Briggs sponsored a ballot initiative for the November 7, 1978 California state election that sought to ban gays and lesbians from working in California's public schools. Officially, California Proposition 6 was a ballot initiative put to referendum on the state ballot. Early opposition was led by LGBT activists and a few progressive politicians, but to many people's surprise, Ronald Reagan moved to publicly oppose the measure. He issued an informal letter of opposition to the initiative, told reporters that he was opposed, and wrote an editorial in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner opposing it. The timing of Reagan's opposition was significant and surprised many because he was then preparing to run for president, a race in which he would need the support of conservatives and those moderates who were uncomfortable with homosexual teachers. At that very moment, he was actively courting leaders from the religious right, including Jerry Falwell, who would go on to form the moral majority to fight out such culture war issues the following year. As Ronald Reagan biographer Lou Cannon puts it, Reagan was well aware that there was those who wanted him to duck the issue, but nevertheless chose to state his convictions. Cannon reports that Reagan was repelled by the aggressive public crusades against homosexual lifestyles, which became a staple of right-wing politics in the late 1970s. Ronald Reagan's November 1st editorial stated in part, "Whatever else it is, homosexuality is not a contagious disease like the measles. Prevailing scientific opinion is that an individual's sexuality is determined at a very early age and that a child's teachers do not really influence this." So there you go. There's kind of the lead up to his run for president in 1980. Early life, political career, and that sort of thing. Now I'm going to read you some fun facts, of course, just about early life and early political life about Reagan. I'll try not to repeat anything. I have so many different notes, so I will try not to do any repeating. Let me see here. First and foremost, as we know, I said his dad called him Dutch. Reagan had several nicknames throughout his life, but his first was given to him by his father, Jack Reagan, shortly after he was born on February 6th of 1911 in Tampico, Illinois. Marveling at his son's heft, Jack referred to the baby as a fat little Dutchman, a nickname strengthened by the Dutch boy haircuts he received as a child. According to Reagan's autobiography, when he was older, he began asking people to call him Dutch because he didn't feel Ronald was rugged enough for a young, red-blooded American boy. Pretty funny stuff. His acting resume was very long. As a sports broadcaster, Ronald Reagan primarily covered Chicago Cubs games. Because the team held their spring training in Southern California, Reagan was able to convince the broadcaster to let him use the training as a vacation away from Iowa's winters. In 1937, on one of these trips, Ronald Reagan met up with Joy Hodges, a singer he knew from back home who went to Hollywood. She put him in touch with a talent agent who called up a casting director. He got a screen test and scored a contract with Warner Brothers. Reagan acted in over 50 movies over the next 3 decades, including New Rockne All-American, where he played real-life college football player George Gipper Gipp. The part gave him his Gipper nickname. Ronald Reagan was upset about never winning an Oscar. Most of Reagan's films were not exactly award contenders, but that didn't stop the president from feeling like he was owed a little consideration from the Academy. In his 2018 memoir, Movie Nights with the Reagans, Reagan aide Mark Weinberg wrote that during his time in the White House, the commander-in-chief expressed annoyance that no one from his former profession acknowledged his evolution from performer to world leader with an honorary award. You would think that after what I've done, being the only one from that profession to do so, they would commemorate it in some way, he reportedly told Weinberg in the 1980s. But I guess their political agenda has taken over good manners. Reagan did have one flirtation with the Oscars. On March 30th of 1981, he was shot by a would-be assassin, John Hinckley Jr. The award ceremony scheduled to take place that day was postponed by 24 hours out of respect for the president. We're going to get into more about the assassination attempt in part 2, but it's pretty funny. Didn't know that. Ronald Reagan was actually almost nearly killed by a chimp. The nadir of Reagan's acting career may have been 1951's Bedtime for Bonzo, in which the future leader of the free world tried to corral a mischievous chimpanzee. While shooting a scene with Peggy, the chimp portraying Bonzo, the animal became intrigued by Reagan's tie and began pulling on it like a rope. Refusing to let go, she compressed the knot into something no bigger than Reagan's fingernail. After finally being released by his animal assailant, Reagan was tended to by crew members who had to cut the tie off his neck. Crazy. Chimps and all monkeys of all sizes, even little spider monkeys, they are nothing to mess with. They will mess you up. He was an FBI informant, we know that, in the 1940s. Reagan, then still an actor, but became increasingly involved in politics, became a real-life FBI informant. Both Reagan and his first wife, Jane Wyman, tipped off the Bureau to suspected communist activity in Hollywood. Reagan apparently had some misgivings about his actions, fearing Hollywood was using too heavy a hand in persecuting suspected Red sympathizers. He once asked an agent, "Do they expect us to constitute ourselves as a little FBI of our own and determine just who is a commie and who isn't?" Pretty interesting. Okay, let me see what else I got for you here while I have you guys. The future president's last movie role was in the 1964 release The Killers. Based on an Ernest Hemingway story, it was Reagan's only role as a villain in a film, and it was the first made-for-TV movie. The Killers was considered too violent for TV and released to movie theaters instead. Crazy stuff. I told you he started out life as a Democrat. He supported the New Deal efforts of President FDR, and then he officially became a Republican in 1962. But he had grown more conservative during the 1950s as he toured as a General Electric spokesman. This is another cool fact. Ronald Reagan was not the original choice to star in Casablanca instead of Humphrey Bogart. The urban legend over the issue is documented on Snopes.com, and it started with a paragraph in a Warner Brothers press release issued before the movie was made. Humphrey Bogart was always expected to play the lead role. So that is definitely a urban legend and a myth. In 1950, Reagan campaigned for Helen Gahagan Douglas in her bitter Senate race against Richard Nixon. A decade later, Reagan campaigned widely for Nixon in the 1960 presidential election against John F. Kennedy. Pretty crazy stuff. Young Ronald Reagan was successful as an actor and football player at Eureka College, but his most important role was as a lifeguard at a local park in Illinois. The future president saved an estimated 77 lives in his summers as a lifeguard. Crazy stuff, crazy stuff. So we know that. Oh, he had a happy childhood. Ronald Reagan said that he grew up with a happy childhood. His father was a shoe salesman, and his mother taught her son how to read when he was 5 years old. Reagan did well in school and graduated from Eureka College in Illinois in 1932. We know he was the voice of the Chicago Cubs. He was the Screen Actors Guild president. Just making sure I have no other things to tell you guys here, because I don't want to... No. I'm just making sure. No, I think that's pretty much it. Okay. Yeah, because all this other stuff we will kind of go over in oh wait, you know what? Here we go. This is one other thing I can tell you. My apologies. A man between two Browns. The state of California has an interesting gubernatorial history over the past 70 plus years. There have only been a handful of governors since the late 1950s. 3 of the gubernatorial terms in that time span have been served by a man named Edmund G. Brown. Of course, California residents will let you know that they're 2 very different men, but boasting the same name. Ronald Reagan fell between the governor duties of Edmund G. Pat Brown and Edmund G. Jerry Brown, the very same man who is presently serving in the same office that he took in the late 1970s, after Ronald Reagan turned his eyes toward government at the federal level. There are many conclusions we can draw from this. A Brown can't beat an actor running for governor, but they can score the office after an actor has served out their terms. It's pretty funny. I didn't know that about the Pat Brown and Jerry Brown thing in California. So pretty cool stuff. All right, so that's pretty much it. Everything else we'll get into, of course, in part 2. So hope you enjoyed here, part 1, a look at the childhood, education, and acting career and early political life of our 40th president of the United States, Ronald Reagan. The first president that we're doing that was the first president when I was born. I was born in 1980, so Ronald Reagan was president then, and I do remember toward the end of his second term, when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, I do remember Ronald Reagan a bit when I was a kid. So there you go. So it's the first president that I actually truly can remember that we're doing here in the presidential series. So pretty fun stuff. So there you go, guys. Thank you, as always, for all the support. Thank you for everything you guys do. You're the best. Best subscribers on YouTube, and I mean that sincerely. You guys are awesome. Henry and I have so much fun doing this, and the questions we get and everything, it's a blast. So don't forget, submit those questions for our question and answer video that's going to be coming up. Please, submit some questions for Henry and I. And that's pretty much it. We will see you tomorrow for part 2. See you tomorrow, guys. Thanks. Bye-bye now.
My name is Ronald Reagan. I have been asked to talk on several subjects that have to do with the problems of the day. It must seem presumptuous to some of you that a member of my profession would stand here and attempt to talk to anyone on serious problems that face the nation and the world. It would be strange if it were otherwise. Most of us in Hollywood are very well aware of the concept or the misconception that many people, our fellow citizens, have about people in show business. It was only a generation ago that the people of my profession couldn't be buried in the churchyard. Of course, the world has improved since then. We can be buried now. As a matter of fact, the eagerness of some of you to perform that service gets a little frightening at times. Now, back in 1927, an American socialist, Norman Thomas, 6 times candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said the American people would never vote for socialism. But he said, under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program. There are many ways in which our government has invaded the precincts of private citizens, the method of earning a living. Our government is in business to the extent of owning more than 19,000 businesses covering 47 different lines of activity. This amounts to 1/5 of the total industrial capacity of the United States. But at the moment, I'd like to talk about another way, because this threat is with us and at the moment is more imminent. One of the traditional methods of imposing statism or socialism on a people has been by way of medicine. It's very easy to disguise a medical program as a humanitarian project. Most people are a little reluctant to oppose anything that suggests medical care for people who possibly can't afford it. Now, the American people, if you put it to them about socialized medicine and gave them a chance to choose, would unhesitatingly vote against it. We had an example of this under the Truman administration. It was proposed that we have a compulsory health insurance program for all people in the United States, and of course the American people unhesitatingly rejected this. So, with the American people on record as not wanting socialized medicine, Congressman Farrand introduced the Farrand Bill. This was the idea that all people of Social Security age should be brought under a program of compulsory health insurance. Now, this would not only be our senior citizens, this would be the dependents and those who are disabled. This would be young people if they are dependents of someone eligible for Social Security. Now, Congressman Farrand brought the program out on that idea of just for that particular group of people. But Congressman Farrand was subscribing to this foot-in-the-door philosophy, because he said, if we can only break through and get our foot inside the door, then we can expand the program after that. Walter Reuther said, it's no secret that the United Automobile Workers is officially on record as backing a program of national health insurance. And by national health insurance, he meant socialized medicine for every American. Well, let's see what the socialists themselves had to say about it. They say, once the Ferrand Bill is passed, this nation will be provided with a mechanism for socialized medicine capable of indefinite expansion in every direction until it includes the entire population. Well, we can't say we haven't been warned. Now, Congressman Ferrand is no longer a congressman of the United States government. He has been replaced, not in his particular assignment, but in his backing of such a bill by Congressman King of California. It is presented in the idea of a great emergency that millions of our senior citizens are unable to provide needed medical care. But this ignores the fact that in the last decade, 127 million of our citizens, in just 10 years, have come under the protection of some form of privately owned medical or hospital insurance. Now, the advocates of this bill, when you try to oppose it, challenge you on an emotional basis. They say, what would you do? Throw these poor old people out to die with no medical attention? That's ridiculous, and of course, no one has advocated it. As a matter of fact, in the last session of Congress, a bill was adopted known as the Kerr-Mills Bill. Now, without even allowing this bill to be tried to see if it works, they have introduced this King bill, which is really the Ferrand Bill. What is the Kerr-Mills Bill? It is a frank recognition of the medical need or problem of our senior citizens that I've mentioned. And it has provided from the federal government money to the states and the local communities that can be used at the discretion of the state to help those people who need it. Now, what reason could the other people have for backing a bill which says we insist on compulsory health insurance for senior citizens on a basis of age alone, regardless of whether they are worth millions of dollars, whether they have an income, whether they're protected by their own insurance, whether they have savings? I think we could be excused for believing that, as ex-Congressman Ferrand said, this was simply an excuse to bring about what they wanted all the time, socialized medicine. James Madison, in 1788, speaking to the Virginia Convention, said, "Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations." They want to attach this bill to Social Security, and they say here is a great insurance program now instituted, now working. Let's take a look at Social Security itself. Again, very few of us disagree with the original premise that there should be some form of saving that would keep destitution from following unemployment by reason of death, disability, or old age. And to this end, Social Security was adopted. But it was never intended to supplant private savings, private insurance, pension programs of unions and industries. Now, in our country, under our free enterprise system, we have seen medicine reach the greatest heights that it has in any country in the world. Today, the relationship between patient and doctor in this country is something to be envied any place. The privacy, the care that is given to a person, the right to choose a doctor, the right to go from one doctor to the other. But let's also look from the other side at the freedom the doctor loses. A doctor would be reluctant to say this. Well, like you, I'm only a patient, so I can say it in his behalf. The doctor begins to lose freedoms. It's like telling a lie, and one leads to another. First, you decide that the doctor can have so many patients. They're equally divided among the various doctors by the government. But then the doctors aren't equally divided geographically. So a doctor decides he wants to practice in one town, and the government has to say to him, you can't live in that town. They already have enough doctors. You have to go someplace else. And from here, it's only a short step to dictating where he will go. This is a freedom that I wonder whether any of us have the right to take from any human being. I know how I'd feel if you, my fellow citizens, decided that to be an actor, I had to become a government employee and work in a national theater. Take it into your own occupation or that of your husband. All of us can see what happens once you establish the precedent that the government can determine a man's working place and his working methods, determine his employment. From here, it's a short step to all the rest of socialism, to determining his pay. And pretty soon, your son won't decide when he's in school where he will go or what he will do for a living. He will wait for the government to tell him where he will go to work and what he will do. In this country of ours took place the greatest revolution that has ever taken place in the world's history, the only true revolution. Every other revolution simply exchanged one set of rulers for another. But here, for the first time in all the thousands of years of man's relation to man, a little group of men, the Founding Fathers, for the first time, established the idea that you and I had within ourselves the God-given right and ability to determine our own destiny. This freedom was built into our government with safeguards. We talk democracy today, and strangely we let democracy begin to assume the aspect of majority rule is all that is needed. Well, majority rule is a fine aspect of democracy, provided there are guarantees written in to our government concerning the rights of the individual and of the minorities. What can we do about this? Well, you and I can do a great deal. We can write to our congressmen, to our senators. We can say right now that we want no further encroachment on these individual liberties and freedoms. And at the moment, the key issue is we do not want socialized medicine. Now, you may think when I say write to the congressman or the senator that this is like writing fan mail to a television program. It isn't. In Washington today, 40,000 letters, less than 100 per congressman, are evidence of a trend in public thinking. Representative Halleck of Indiana has said, when the American people want something from Congress, regardless of its political complexion, if they make their wants known, Congress does what the people want. So write. It's as simple as finding just the name of your congressman or your senator, and then you address your letter to that individual's name. If he's a congressman, to the House Office Building, Washington, D.C. If he's a senator, to the Senate Office Building, Washington, D.C. And if this man writes back to you and tells you that he too is for free enterprise, but we have these great services and so forth that must be performed by government, don't let him get away with it. Show that you have not been convinced. Write a letter right back and tell him that you believe in government economy and fiscal responsibility, that you know that governments don't tax to get the money they need. Governments will always find a need for the money they get, and that you demand the continuation of our traditional free enterprise system. You and I can do this. The only way we can do it is by writing to our congressman, even if we believe that he's on our side to begin with. Write to strengthen his hand. Give him the ability to stand before his colleagues in Congress and say, I have heard from my constituents and this is what they want. Write those letters now, call your friends and tell them to write them. If you don't, this program, I promise you, will pass just as surely as the sun will come up tomorrow. And behind it will come other federal programs that will invade every area of freedom as we have known it in this country, until one day, as Norman Thomas said, we will awake to find that we have socialism. And if you don't do this, and if I don't do it, one of these days, you and I are going to spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
The following pre-recorded political program is sponsored by TV for Goldwater Miller on behalf of Barry Goldwater, Republican candidate for President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, we take pride in presenting a thoughtful address by Ronald Reagan. Mr. Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you and good evening. The sponsor has been identified, but unlike most television programs, the performer hasn't been provided with a script. As a matter of fact, I have been permitted to choose my own words and discuss my own ideas regarding the choice that we face in the next few weeks. I have spent most of my life as a Democrat. I recently have seen fit to follow another course. I believe that the issues confronting us cross party lines. Now, one side in this campaign has been telling us that the issues of this election are the maintenance of peace and prosperity. The line has been used, we've never had it so good. But I have an uncomfortable feeling that this prosperity isn't something on which we can base our hopes for the future. No nation in history has ever survived a tax burden that reached a third of its national income. Today, 37 cents out of every dollar earned in this country is the tax collector's share. And yet our government continues to spend $17 million a day more than the government takes in. We haven't balanced our budget 28 out of the last 34 years. We've raised our debt limit 3 times in the last 12 months. And now our national debt is 1.5 times bigger than all the combined debts of all the nations of the world. We have $15 billion in gold in our treasury, We don't own an ounce. Foreign dollar claims are $27.3 billion. And we've just had announced that the dollar of 1939 will now purchase 45 cents in its total value. As for the peace that we would preserve, I wonder who among us would like to approach the wife or mother whose husband or son has died in South Vietnam and ask them if they think this is a peace that should be maintained indefinitely. Do they mean peace, or do they mean we just want to be left in peace? There can be no real peace while one American is dying someplace in the world for the rest of us. We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not too long ago, two friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who had escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are. I had some place to escape to." And in that sentence, he told us the entire story. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down. Man's old age dream, the ultimate in individual freedom consistent with law and order, or down to the ant-heap of totalitarianism. And regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. In this vote harvesting time, they use terms like the Great Society, or as we were told a few days ago by the President, we must accept a greater government activity in the affairs of the people. But they've been a little more explicit in the past, and among themselves, and all of the things I now will quote have appeared in print. These are not Republican accusations. For example, they have voices that say the Cold War will end through our acceptance of a not undemocratic socialism. Another voice says the profit motive has become outmoded. It must be replaced by the incentives of the welfare state. Or our traditional system of individual freedom is incapable of solving the complex problems of the 20th century. Senator Fulbright has said at Stanford University that the Constitution is outmoded. He referred to the President as our moral teacher and our leader. And he says he is hobbled in his task by the restrictions of power imposed on him by this antiquated document. He must be freed so that he can do for us what he knows is best. And Senator Clark of Pennsylvania, another articulate spokesman, defines liberalism as meeting the material needs of the masses through the full power of centralized government. Well, I, for one, resent it when a representative of the people refers to you and me, the free men and women of this country, as the masses. This is a term we haven't applied to ourselves in America. But beyond that, the full power of centralized government, this was the very thing the founding fathers sought to minimize. They knew that governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. They also knew, those founding fathers, that outside of its legitimate functions, government does nothing as well or as economically as the private sector of the economy. Now, we have no better example of this than government's involvement in the farm economy over the last 30 years. Since 1955, the cost of this program has nearly doubled. 1/4 of farming in America is responsible for 85% of the farm surplus. 3/4 of farming is out on the free market and has known a 21% increase in the per capita consumption of all its produce. You see, that 1/4 of farming, that's regulated and controlled by the federal government. In the last 3 years, we've spent $43 in the feed grain program for every dollar bushel of corn we don't grow. Senator Humphrey last week charged that Barry Goldwater, as president, would seek to eliminate farmers. He should do his homework a little better, because he'll find out that we've had a decline of 5 million in the farm population under these government programs. He'll also find that the Democratic administration has sought to get from Congress extension of the farm program to include that 3/4 that is now free. He'll find that they've also asked for the right to imprison farmers who wouldn't keep books as prescribed by the federal government. The Secretary of Agriculture asked for the right to seize farms through condemnation and resell them to other individuals. And contained in that same program was a provision that would have allowed the federal government to remove 2 million farmers from the soil. At the same time, there's been an increase in the Department of Agriculture employees. There's now 1 for every 30 farms in the United States. And still, they can't tell us how 66 shiploads of grain headed for Austria disappeared without a trace, and Billy Sol Estes never left shore. Every responsible farmer and farm organization has repeatedly asked the government to free the farm economy. But who are farmers to know what's best for them? The wheat farmers voted against a wheat program. The government passed it anyway. Now the price of bread goes up, the price of wheat to the farmer goes down. Meanwhile, back in the city, under urban renewal, the assault on freedom carries on. Private property rights so diluted that public interest is almost anything a few government planners decide it should be. In a program that takes from the needy and gives to the greedy, we see such spectacles as in Cleveland, Ohio, a $1.5 million building completed only 3 years ago must be destroyed to make way for what government officials call a more compatible use of the land. The president tells us he's now going to start building public housing units in the thousands, where heretofore we've only built them in the hundreds. But FHA and the Veterans Administration tell us they have 120,000 housing units they've taken back through mortgage foreclosure. For 3 decades, we've sought to solve the problems of unemployment through government planning, and the more the plans fail, the more the planners plan. The latest is the Area Redevelopment Agency. They've just declared Rice County, Kansas, a depressed area. Rice County, Kansas has 200 oil wells, and the 14,000 people there have over $30 million on deposit in personal savings in their banks. When the government tells you you're depressed, lie down and be depressed. We have so many people who can't see a fat man standing beside a thin one without coming to the conclusion the fat man got that way by taking advantage of the thin one. So they're going to solve all the problems of human misery through government and government planning. Well, now, if government planning and welfare had the answer, and they've had almost 30 years of it, shouldn't we expect government to read the score to us once in a while? Shouldn't they be telling us about the decline each year in the number of people needing help, the reduction in the need for public housing? But the reverse is true. Each year the need grows greater, the program grows greater. We were told 4 years ago that 17 million people went to bed hungry each night. Well, that was probably true. They were all on a diet. But now we're told that 9.3 million families in this country are poverty-stricken on the basis of earning less than $3,000 a year. Welfare spending 10 times greater than it was in the dark depths of the Depression. We're spending $45 billion on welfare. Now do a little arithmetic and you'll find that if we divided the $45 billion up equally among those 9 million poor families, we'd be able to give each family $4,600 a year. And this, added to their present income, should eliminate poverty. Direct aid to the poor, however, is only running about $600 per family. It would seem that someplace there must be some overhead. Now we declare war on poverty, or you too can be a Bobby Baker. Now, do they honestly expect us to believe that if we add $1 billion to the $45 billion we're spending, one more program to the 30-odd we have, and remember, this new program doesn't replace any, it just duplicates existing programs. Do they believe that poverty is suddenly going to disappear by magic? Well, in all fairness, I should explain there is one part of the new program that isn't duplicated. This is the youth feature. We're now going to solve the dropout problem, juvenile delinquency. by reinstituting something like the old CCC camps. And we're going to put our young people in these camps. But again, we do some arithmetic and we find that we're going to spend each year just on room and board for each young person we help $4,700 a year. We can send them to Harvard for $2,700. Of course, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting Harvard is the answer to juvenile delinquency. But seriously, what are we doing to those we seek to help? Not too long ago, a judge called me here in Los Angeles. He told me of a young woman who'd come before him for a divorce. She had 6 children, was pregnant with her 7th. Under his questioning, she revealed her husband was a laborer earning $250 a month. She wanted the divorce to get an $80 raise. She's eligible for $330 a month in the Aid to Dependent Children program. She got the idea from 2 women in her neighborhood who'd already done that very thing. Yet any time you and I question the schemes of the do-gooders, we're denounced as being against their humanitarian goals. They say we're always against things, we're never for anything. Well, the trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant, it's just that they know so much that isn't so. Now, we're for a provision that destitution should not follow unemployment by reason of old age. And to that end, we have accepted Social Security as a step toward meeting the problem. But we're against those entrusted with this program when they practice deception regarding its fiscal shortcomings, when they charge that any criticism of the program means that we want to end payments to those people who depend on them for a livelihood. They've called it insurance to us in 100 million pieces of literature. But then they appeared before the Supreme Court and they testified it was a welfare program. They only used the term insurance to sell it to the people. And they said Social Security dues are a tax for the general use of the government. And the government has used that tax. There is no fund. Because Robert Byers, the actuarial head, appeared before a congressional committee and admitted that Social Security as of this moment is $298 billion in the hole. But he said there should be no cause for worry, because as long as they had the power to tax, they could always take away from the people whatever they needed to bail them out of trouble. And they're doing just that. A young man, 21 years of age, working at an average salary, his Social Security contribution would in the open market buy him an insurance policy that would guarantee $220 a month at age 65. The government promises $127. He could live it up until he's 31 and then take out a policy that would pay more than Social Security. Now, are we so lacking in business sense that we can't put this program on a sound basis so that people who do require those payments will find they can get them when they're due, that the cupboard isn't bare? Barry Goldwater thinks we can. At the same time, can't we introduce voluntary features that would permit a citizen who can do better on his own to be excused upon presentation of evidence that he had made provision for the non-earning years? Should we not allow a widow with children to work and not lose the benefits supposedly paid for by her deceased husband? Shouldn't you and I be allowed to declare who our beneficiaries will be under this program, which we cannot do? I think we're for telling our senior citizens that no one in this country should be denied medical care because of a lack of funds. But I think we're against forcing all citizens, regardless of need, into a compulsory government program, especially when we have such examples as was announced last week when France admitted that their Medicare program is now bankrupt. They've come to the end of the road. In addition, was Barry Goldwater so irresponsible when he suggested that our government give up its program of deliberate planned inflation so that when you do get your Social Security pension, $1 will buy $1's worth and not 45 cents worth? I think we're for an international organization where the nations of the world can seek peace. But I think we're against subordinating American interests to an organization that has become so structurally unsound that today you can muster a 2/3 vote on the floor of the General Assembly among nations that represent less than 10% of the world's population. I think we're against the hypocrisy of assailing our allies because here and there they cling to a colony, while we engage in a conspiracy of silence and never open our mouths about the millions of people enslaved in the Soviet colonies in the satellite nations. I think we're foraiding our allies by sharing of our material blessings with those nations which share in our fundamental beliefs. But we're against doling out money government to government, creating bureaucracy, if not socialism, all over the world. We set out to help 19 countries. We're helping 107. We've spent $146 billion. With that money, we bought a $2 million yacht for Haile Selassie. We bought dress suits for Greek undertakers, extra wives for Kenya government officials. We bought 1,000 TV sets for a place where they have no electricity. In the last 6 years, 52 nations have bought $7 billion worth of our gold, and all 52 are receiving foreign aid from this country. No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size, so government programs once launched never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth. Federal employees number 2.5 million, and federal, state, and local, 1 out of 6 of the nation's workforce employed by government. These proliferating bureaus with their thousands of regulations have cost us many of our constitutional safeguards. How many of us realize that today federal agents can invade a man's property without a warrant? They can impose a fine without a formal hearing, let alone a trial by jury, and they can seize and sell his property at auction to enforce the payment of that fine. In Chico County, Arkansas, James Weir overplanted his rice allotment. The government obtained a $17,000 judgment, and a U.S. Marshal sold his 960-acre farm at auction. The government said it was necessary as a warning to others to make the system work. Last February 19th at the University of Minnesota, Norman Thomas, 6 times candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said if Barry Goldwater became president, he would stop the advance of socialism in the United States. I think that's exactly what he will do. But as a former Democrat, I can tell you Norman Thomas isn't the only man who has drawn this parallel to socialism with the present administration. Because back in 1936, Mr. Democrat himself, Al Smith, a great American, came before the American people and charged that the leadership of his party was taking the party of Jefferson, Jackson, and Cleveland down the road under the banners of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. And he walked away from his party and he never returned till the day he died. Because to this day, the leadership of that party has been taking that party, that honorable party, down the road in the image of the Labor Socialist Party of England. Now, it doesn't require expropriation or confiscation of private property or business to impose socialism on a people. What does it mean whether you hold the deed to or the title to your business or property if the government holds the power of life and death over that business or property? And such machinery already exists. The government can find some charge to bring against any concern it chooses to prosecute. Every businessman has his own tale of harassment. Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government. And freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment. Our Democratic opponents seem unwilling to debate these issues. They want to make you and I believe that this is a contest between 2 men, that we're to choose just between 2 personalities. Well, what of this man that they would destroy? And in destroying, they would destroy that which he represents, the ideas that you and I hold dear. Is he the brash and shallow and trigger-happy man they say he is? Well, I've been privileged to know him when. I knew him long before he ever dreamed of trying for high office. And I can tell you personally, I've never known a man in my life I believed so incapable of doing a dishonest or dishonorable thing. This is a man who in his own business, before he entered politics, instituted a profit-sharing plan before unions had ever thought of it. He put in health and medical insurance for all his employees. He took 50% of the profits before taxes and set up a retirement program, a pension plan for all his employees. He sent monthly checks for life to an employee who was ill and couldn't work. He provides nursing care for the children of mothers who work in the stores. When Mexico was ravaged by the floods in the Rio Grande, he climbed in his airplane and flew medicine and supplies down there. An ex-GI told me how he met him. It was the week before Christmas during the Korean War, and he was at the Los Angeles airport trying to get a ride home to Arizona for Christmas. And he said that a lot of servicemen there and no seats available on the planes. And then a voice came over the loudspeaker and said, any men in uniform wanting a ride to Arizona, go to runway such and such. And they went down there. There was a fellow named Barry Goldwater sitting in his plane. Every day in those weeks before Christmas, all day long, he'd load up the plane, fly it to Arizona, fly them to their homes, fly back over to get another load. During the hectic split-second timing of a campaign, this is a man who took time out to sit beside an old friend who was dying of cancer. His campaign managers were understandably impatient, but he said, there aren't many left who care what happens to her. I'd like her to know I care. This is a man who said to his 19-year-old son, there is no foundation like the rock of honesty and fairness. And when you begin to build your life on that rock, with the cement of the faith in God that you have, then you have a real start. This is not a man who could carelessly send other people's sons to war. And that is the issue of this campaign that makes all the other problems I've discussed academic, unless we realize we're in a war that must be won. Those who would trade our freedom for the soup kitchen of the welfare state have told us they have a utopian solution of peace without victory. They call their policy accommodation. And they say if we'll only avoid any direct confrontation with the enemy, he'll forget his evil ways and learn to love us. All who oppose them are indicted as warmongers. They say we offer simple answers to complex problems. Well, perhaps there is a simple answer. Not an easy answer, but simple. If you and I have the courage to tell our elected officials that we want our national policy based on what we know in our hearts is morally right, we cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom, because to save our own skins, we're willing to make a deal with your slave masters. Alexander Hamilton said, a nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. Now let's set the record straight. There's no argument over the choice between peace and war, but there's only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender. Admittedly, there's a risk in any course we follow other than this, but every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. And this is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. And it gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, eventually we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. And what then? Well, Nikita Khrushchev has told his people he knows what our answer will be. He has told them that we're retreating under the pressure of the Cold War, and someday, when the time comes to deliver the final ultimatum, our surrender will be voluntary, because by that time, we will have been weakened from within spiritually, morally, and economically. He believes this because from our side he's heard voices pleading for peace at any price, or better read than dead, or as one commentator put it, he'd rather live on his knees than die on his feet. And therein lies the road to war, because those voices don't speak for the rest of us. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Just in the face of this enemy? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the Pharaohs? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard round the world? The martyrs of history were not fools. And our honored dead, who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis, didn't die in vain. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay, there is a point beyond which they must not advance. This is the meaning, in the phrase of Barry Goldwater, peace through strength. Winston Churchill said the destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. And he said there's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. We will keep in mind and remember that Barry Goldwater has faith in us. He has faith that you and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronnie, for this very stirring speech. I am John Kilroy, National Chairman, TV for Goldwater Miller. I want to ask each of you, to take part in this important presidential campaign by contributing what you can to keep the Goldwater Crusade on the air. Send $1, $10, $50 or any amount to TV for Goldwater Miller, Box 80, Los Angeles 51. I repeat, TV Goldwater Miller, Box 80, Los Angeles 51.
The preceding pre-recorded political program was paid for by TV for Goldwater Miller on behalf of Barry Goldwater, Republican candidate for President of the United States.